Welcome everyone to this artist talk today at Gallery van Etten here in Oslo. The work that we're here to discuss is called Ulydige bygg, which translates to Disobedient Buildings. And my name is Ulydige, and I'm one of the postdoctoral researchers on a research project at the University of Oslo titled Disobedient Building. University of Oxford, yeah, sorry.
Best reaction.
So yeah, the University of Oxford, and we started this collaboration with the gallery here about a year ago. We've been researching everyday lives of people who live in blocks of flats in 3 European countries, so that is Romania, Norway and the UK. And one of the things that we were quite interested in doing was to find out ways to communicate our research findings to different audiences, but also to engage with artists and unexpected or creative ways that artists might engage with the same problematics. And in this work we then started working with Katja here at Van Etten, and was lucky enough to get some support from the Norwegian Arts Council and the municipality of Oslo to engage a sound artist. And Jiska here, she's a Dutch artist who got her arts degree from the Netherlands and then moved to Oslo to do her master's in Bergen at the Academy of Arts in Bergen. And Jiska's artistic practice, it is working kind of across and amongst different mediums. You work with sound and you work with maps and you work with walking and also now this interactive website. And Jiska has been working for a while on a project called Torn Tracks. And I think that was one of the projects that we looked at that really impressed us in the research project, and also the gallery, that we were really enthusiastic about what Jiska could do if she got then access to research findings, and the way that Jiska works with the quite fluid and ever-changing aspects of place and the people who inhabit these places. With us today as well we have Trond Lossius, who is also based in Bergen and is a sound artist. And Trond's career kind of reaches, I think, touches most of the institutions in Norway. He's currently a professor at the Norwegian Filmskole, but also Grieg Akademia in Bergen. But he's also worked with the PhD program at KIO, Oslo Academy of Arts, and has a specific fascination for recording sounds of the suburbs. So we wanted to invite Trond to come and be in conversation with Jiska about Jiska's work, Ulydige bygg, which is a sound walk in the area, and have a chat about place and what sound can do to explore place. So I wanted first to invite Jiska to maybe talk us through a bit about your process and the work, Ulydige bygg. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the nice introduction. And yeah, it's been really nice to work on this project and get access to this like behind the scenes material that people have sent in. Very different types of material. Some of it is, there's like a selection of it visible here. So there's people have drawn maps and taken photographs based on different like questions that they got, or like photograph something that makes a sound that you like or a sound that you don't like, sent in herbs? No.
Spices.
Spices
Yeah.
that you use. And to see all of this, and in combination with that, I've also met some of them and been like given a guided tour of the blocks. And I got the key for a week, and I could just wander around like a creep in the hallways and visited in an apartment. So it's been really, and that research took place over about a year or so. So it's really been nice and interesting to get to know this place over such a long amount of time. And it resulted in this sound work that you can experience outside. So if you, I guess you all already have a booklet, but in there you also see how to access the work, and it has some like extra information per track that you can follow and some suggested routes, but you can also choose to walk wherever you want. And the sound is played through the website of, or a particular part of the website of this Torn Tracks project that Ulydige also mentioned, which you see here is kind of like an audio map where the four like main works in the colors are starting points, but you can also take detours, you can take a sidetrack when you come to specific choices or crossroads on it, and then detour to something else and come back. And in the booklet you also find like a map with the suggested routes, and then you can just explore the surroundings based on that. There's some directions in the walks as well. And I have some like scans of the booklet. You have an intro, and then each work has. I also have a background in photography, so that's often a tool that I use as well as documentation and research and drawing. I'm not a very good like drawer, but I do find some of the like notes interesting, and I use them as tools also for compositions and thinking about sound. I'm often interested in like how sound moves around in a space, and since these blocks are so high and kind of close together, the sound often echoes. For example, if there's an opening at the gallery here, then people living in like the 14th floor still hear quite literally what people say on the ground. So that was one of the trails that I followed in my own research. And there's some text and as well. And then maps also is like a fascination of me. So I was very interested to see these really lovely maps of how people use the surroundings. I had been here one time before accidentally actually in one of the apartments, but not that much otherwise. So it was very nice to like walk around based on these maps when I started the project as well, and see what people singled out as like a thing. Like there's one in the middle that talks about the allotments. There's this like parcelkasse, and I don't think I would have found that place if it wasn't for the map, because it's kind of hidden. So that was very nice. And then also in my process I kept on like drawing different types of maps for myself to document the getting to know of the place, but also listening back to recordings, just noting down, drawing, mapping what I recorded in different ways, drawings in more text-based, and the durational aspect of it as well. Like the first recordings that I made, I think, are from May, June, and then the last are November, October. And in the pictures as well, you see this process of different seasons, and that's also a part of the research. And of course sound does this as well a lot. Like you kind of capture this specific time and then you listen back to it in a different time, so there's a nice like layering there as well. And while we're sitting here, actually I just felt that the metro was passing. This has also been really a nice aspect, I think, of this place, that there's a lot of places here where you feel the metro passing, and the lines, quite literally, we are here now, So they pass really close by, and yeah, that was just a nice observation. More different maps of the recordings that I've made based on height, and there's different like collections, so different paths that are present in the neighborhood. Recording height by the height of trees and streetlights. And then we're back to the map that you used to listen to the work. Yeah.
Good.
That's.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I think before we go on and ask more questions about your work, I'd like to also ask Trond to maybe say a bit about your career and the way that you work with sound and place.
Yeah. So my education was first in music composition, and quite accidentally at some point very early on, almost by accident, I did a work where I used 4 speakers in a room at the corners, and that kind of opened up a lot of things about how sound interacts with space, and how when you are within the sound, when it's surrounding you, how that is inviting very different ways of being present with sound and taking in the place that you are situated through listening. So I got addicted to working with spatial audio, but a lot of what I did for many years was very much based on a quite musical, abstract way of working with sound. But then, like 2010, I was working at Verket at the time, and we got hold of a microphone which is an ambisonic microphone, which is just a recording technique that is recording spatial audio. So it's capturing sound coming from all directions, and it's capturing this in a way so that you can play it back afterwards and sort of like recreate how sound were surrounding the microphone or surrounding yourself when you were recording it. And I was really, really fascinated by that, because there was like a shift from recording sound, which I think particularly if you come from a music background, you know, with the microphone, you very often think of recording sound. But this was much more about capturing a sense of place, which intrigued me much more, you know. And I just started doing those kind of recordings on a very regular basis. I had no idea what I was going to use it for, and I think, you know, for a while I thought maybe I actually, you know, eventually found myself a hobby, you know, even though it kind of resembled what I did the rest of the time a lot. but then also because, you know, because I kind of like did this out of working hours, I often brought this recorder back home where we lived, and we'd moved to Ågotnes, which is at the very outskirts of Bergen, at the Sotra Island, some years early on. And I think like moving there initially, I also had that this, you kind of know, you're not connected to a place you're moving to initially, and I think for me it took a while, you know, this kind of connecting to it. But it was really when I was just starting walking the neighborhoods with this microphone, doing recordings, was a way of tapping into this place and getting interested in that, and like really sensing what this place is, which, you know, initially felt very sort of banal or kind of, you know, anonymous. Nothing very particular sticking about it initially. And I think also then I also increasingly observed how this place, Ågotnes, which is really at the outskirts of the city, I think it's as far out as you could live and still have decent bus communication into town. I also realized how this place very quickly were becoming suburbanized. And I think that also kind of like tapped back to experience from my childhood when I was growing up much closer to Bergen and Ytre Sandviken, but that was also a very new kind of like suburban neighborhoods at the time. And actually kind of like the very first memory I have, we were living in kind of like not a tall building like these ones, but we were living right next to one. I think like the very first memory I have is just sitting on the top of a table, looking out the window at traffic passing by one of those tall buildings. So in one way, like doing these recordings outdoor in suburban places was very much just coming back to the kind of like same kind of just observing the world drift around you, you know, that was kind of, you know, doing as a very small child. So from this I got very interested in the soundscapes of the suburbs, and I'm still recording, where we live at Ågotnes, but also I've been doing in many other places, and I think gradually this also kind of got integrated into the kind of artistic works that I did. So for the last 10 years or so, a lot of the installations I've done, I work with those kind of field recordings in gallery spaces. Very often with a friend of mine, Jeremy Walsh, who's a video artist. So we've had a series of works called The Atmospherics, where we've been traveling the west of Norway. And I think, exactly what we've been dealing with has changed over the years as our own research interests kind of continue to develop and change. But I think throughout this, for me, almost like a global suburbanization, how that expresses itself in the Western Norway and other places where I've been, has been kind of a very, very central part of what I've been doing. And I think for Jeremy, likewise, also that these Norwegian landscapes that were so important to defining a Norwegian identity, and ideas about landscape and nationality, in the 19th century, how these still in one way, the nature is still really impressive, but at the same time, there's also, these are also modern, often suburbanized or post-industrial, and it's kind of dealing within those kind of things. And then we do these installations that are combining multiple videos and then spatial audio playback in the space. Yeah.
Thank you. I think, a nice maybe then follow-up question to that would be that the three of us the other day, we did go for a walk in the area and test and experienced Jiska's sound work. Maybe then, you were talking about the suburbs and the west coast of Norway. How was the experience for you to walk around here in the... someone told me last weekend, I think, that this borough in Oslo is or Tøyen, this area has the highest population density in Norway. So, yeah, can you say a bit about how was it for you to walk around in this very urban
I really enjoyed it, to say that first of all. Also, I've known Jiska's work for a number of years. We were in regular contact in Bergen when I was working at Bergen Center for Electronic Arts, and she first were at the Art Academy, and then later on also a lot affiliated with the Sound Art Gallery and with Verk. So I think from the very outset when she started working with the Torn Track, we were discussing the project, and I was suggesting certain ways that the website could be set up, and I've been very intrigued by the kind of recordings she's working with, and that kind of was just continued and strengthened here, I think, about how the projects are developing. But I think it's a very fascinating way of walking this sort of walking one way in the shoes of her, and I think, for me it was a very, very kind of multi-layered listening experience. It's like with headphones, you can choose whether you want to shield off the sounds that are coming from around you and only listen, using noise cancellation, or if you want to kind of both listen to what's going on now and what's going on in recordings. And I did the latter, and you get this sense of multiple layers of place and time kind of coexisting in it. And it also, for me, what Jiska's doing is also, it's she is herself very present in the recordings. You can hear her walking. It's a very particular way of listening in the recordings, I think. Sometimes playing with them. Also, I think the way they're editing, the way that the space is being read. And it's at some point it was particular one section probably recorded between two of these tall buildings where someone's drilling in the distance. And the echoes bouncing back and forth between the two buildings, and become this really beautiful, almost synth-like drone thing. And it's being there, listening to it, listening to her, having listened to this earlier on. It's also listening to her excitement about this sound when it was that. And also then kind of realizing that what I'm listening to now is not happening now. It happened sometimes earlier. So it becomes this multiple times, multiple places, and multiple persons kind of overlaid in the listening experience, we really, really enjoyed.
Yeah, maybe you can then say a bit about, I mean, how did you work then, again, like in the editing, to put these walks together? Because it's not a recording from, it's not like you walked out with a recorded play and walked for 4 minutes and that was it.
No, it took some time to find like the right entrance, I feel, but I kind of made like 4 main. When I structured the recordings, I always write like a report after I've been out and record, and then shortly what the recording is about, and then based on that, listening back, I make different like collections. How would things fit together? And then because the buildings are so, I thought very like spatial about the sound and the buildings, and like then very clearly became. One like collection was about the surroundings of the buildings, so the sounds coming in and like forming themselves around these buildings. But then also the construction of the buildings is quite interesting, because you have like they're very tall, and then you have 3 or 4 different types of apartments, and you have a hallway only on every 3rd floor, with this like, I don't know what you call it. You walk down the hallway, and then you have like a, not an inlet, but kind of like an inlet with 3 doors, and there's one that goes straight ahead, but the other 2 go like either up or down some stairs to get into their apartments. So one hallway serves 3 floors, and then so the people that meet in like in their in the doorway are not actually neighbors on the same floors, and this really intrigued me as well. So that became like one collection of recordings around the construction of these buildings, and then the 3rd was about like the airflow in and out of these buildings and through the buildings, and the last one was about the allotments, which I think are kind of like a nice micro version of these buildings with their like boxes, the apartments, and then so yeah, I kind of try to make different constellations of the recordings, and then based on that I kind of work quite intuitively with what the recordings have, and often I'm frustrated because then when I'm recording and listen back, I'm often interested in like the background sounds that are not that well recorded, or they're kind of far away, and then I have to find these ways to like highlight them, and then it's not always possible to just like turn the volume up and you hear it, but I have to find these different ways. So sometimes I work with like repeating the same sound, or like different ways of highlighting these the most interesting parts of the recording, and then on top of that I try to find like a nice connection with a route based on the paths that I had walked and these maps, and all of that together became this.
I mean, I think that it's the yellow walk, that's the allotment. Yeah. And for those of you who's not been out and experienced it yet, it does take you through a landscape, but then at some point, I won't give away too much, but it takes you kind of like into the plants themselves.
That's a more abstract part of it.
It's a more abstract part.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a bit about, because you do some of the soundscapes that you bring forth in this work are quite are not as abstract. Like as a visitor, you kind of get a sense of there's the sound of someone playing, or the traffic going by, but then you have those quite abstract pieces as well. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah. I think they like are made quite intuitively, like based on what I hear and then what I feel like what fits with it. But in the case of this work, it was also because I was kind of thinking about these herbariums and the categorizing of things, and then I kind of did that in the recordings as well. But now I lost my train of thought.
But maybe you can say a bit about how you wanted to.
Yeah, I think there are two things here that are very interesting to look into. I mean, one is the way that you are dealing with categories, which is something I've recognized from Jeremy Welch that I'm working with also, even though he's working with photo and video mostly. But it's, I think, I mean, he's very much into psychogeography, and this is like, derivé just drifting around, which I think, is probably part of your practice as well here. And it also occurs to me very clearly, both in the way that the whole Torn track project is kind of a thought that there's this database of recordings, and they can be organized, grouped in different ways, and therefore read differently. So I mean, if you check out the website, you will find the many different ways of accessing them. You can access them by the day of recording, where they were recording, or by, like here, where they're grouped in certain ways, linked to this project. But there's always new ways of rereading these underlying material. But it also, I mean, it's also within each of these recordings, they're very clearly like thematical, like the one with air. So it's even within one recording, there's this kind of like working with categories, which I find very interesting. And I was rereading like a text of Lev Mano, which like the new media researcher, where he's saying that in modernity, narration or the narrative was like the preferred form, both first of the novel, later on of the film. But then in the age of the computer, this is being substituted for the database, where all of the data is laid out, and all of it has equal value, and it doesn't kind of like contain a story in and of itself, but it becomes a matter of how you're traversing this. And I think in your project that it's like this traversing in many different ways. One's traversing, this around here. I mean, you were walking around here recording. We are walking around listening to your recordings. But it's also the very particular way that these recordings are organized for this project also becomes a more like abstract, in its interface, a way of traversing the material too.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, because the Torn Tracks project, as you said, it has different ways of searching this collection of like ever-growing and changing sound works. And this is only one of the ways of searching this collection or accessing it. You mentioned it briefly, but that's actually how when we first worked together, you helped me with like how to set up this website and the base, how to structure this database in the best way to like be able to have these different ways of accessing it.
Yeah, maybe it's actually, maybe you can talk us through. I mean, some of us experienced it, but some haven't. Like, what are we looking at? What are the things we're looking at the website?
On this view?
Yeah.
So I have the 4 main tracks, which are the colored ones here. Say you choose this one as a starting point, then you can find on the map where to start, if you want to follow my suggestion. And then you just press play, and you don't actually have to look at it really while walking around. But when you get to these points where there's like a crossing and you could take like a side path, it will let you know, and then you can choose if you want to continue or you want to sidetrack and move to the next sound work. And all of these like side tracks are also, as you look at them, as side thoughts of the main tracks, or things that didn't really fit in there, but I still want to have in the work, like the drilling that's echoing between the buildings. That's also one of them. And then also within that there's another like type of gathering different things together, which is this like nexus, or like this round points that also each can have different description. So there's various layers within this already, and then of course, since you have the map that you can follow and the booklet, that's another thing, and then you have the sound. And I think after the exhibition is over, now I've made the work so that they are adjusted to like walking around outside and having sound coming in from outside as well. But then when the exhibition is over, I will also make a version that is for like listening from home, which is a very different situation, and you will hear more of the recordings that that will just get lost outside. And that's also part of the whole Torn Tracks project, is that there can be like several versions of the same work existing together or like besides each other. And yeah, different, not every track pops up in every view as well. Yeah.
And some of the tracks have alternative versions, right?
Yes.
So there's always more than one way of seeing it.
Yeah, some have like recordings of live performances, some are studio versions, sometimes it's just like plain one recording without edit or, yeah. Yeah.
But when I was looking at your website, I noticed that the last tracks that you'd added before you did this project, they're from 2019 from Fører, probably from when you were part of this Vestlandsutstillingen.
Yes.
So just curious about your field recording practices. That's something that's ongoing, or is it something that you enter into in a specific context of researching a specific place towards towards like a specific opportunity to also share this with an audience?
I think it's both. I do also just take like both my photo camera and recording things with me without a plan, and then use it. But I think it's often very nice to work with kind of like if you're in a specific situation, that like this invitation is like an invitation that has its context and like boundaries maybe, and I always like to find out how to work with these boundaries or within them, or like try to, so I think that's always like a nice challenge to myself. But I do also just bring it and record. Yeah.
But I would guess that doing a project like this is sort of like encourages a much more thorough investigation of a particular place. Than when I'm out recording, it's quite arbitrary when I do it or where I do it. So I don't think I've really, maybe with one exception, like really surveyed a place systematically the way that I see you doing here.
Home, since you
that's actually there's two places. One is where I'm living, and the other one is also when I was doing a residency in Mülheim, where we were also like for 2 weeks just out recording every single day. So that's the two exceptions.
But the previous works that you mentioned from the Vestlandsutstillingen were also very different, because I had like based on both time available and budget available, I had around like 5 recording days per place, which is very limited. And then here I had so much longer to also come back, and I live at Bøler, so it's not far. I can just go at different times of the day, and a very different approach to like getting to know a place. So it's nice to also have the two. Yeah,
and probably the ability to live with this place for a much longer period of time.
And one thing that is a part of your work, it's also a different time of day and different weather conditions. And I think another thing that's quite striking when you look at the booklet and you see that all these images of summer, and then you walk around in the area now in November in Norway, it's quite different. And I wondered if you wanted to say a bit about that, like shifting of we touched upon it already, like the way that walking in your footsteps, and it is like a play on temporality, isn't it? But and also maybe Trond, how do you think also the conditions of your listening to it, which was a grey November day, how that affected it?
Yeah, probably, and I'm sure if I listened to that night, not daytime, that would make a huge difference immediately, in terms of what you see and don't see and how spaces appear. I definitely But I think another thing that occurred to me, very, very clearly when I was listening to it the other day, is how the idea that, we very easily have this idea that a place is a place and it's something fixed and stable. And I think, the more I've been recording, the less I feel that is the case. And that's, that goes for my own recordings and the places I do record, and, so some of them that I come back to and record again and again. But there also was a very clear sense of that in these recordings, that there's, it's like this idea that a place that exists as a constant, I think like these kind of recordings and your work really reveal that that's simply not the case. It's always particular, it's always in a flow, it's always changing. So being back same place is not being back the same place. It's different. There's kind of like the stream, and you can hear traces, memories of someone else being there, sometimes else, but the place was also different. And it's like even in just 10 minutes time, the place change. Because something, there's like the light change, or someone starts doing something that changes the place. But it's, I think this is also a quality that comes very clearly through in these recordings, which intrigues me, because I think it's one of the things that these kind of field recordings and this kind of listening practice reveals is a very different understanding of place to the one which is very like visually based and object based and kind of searching for what's stable, what can be categorized and defined once and for all. So it really unsettles it.
Yeah, I was just thinking about the one main track about the surroundings. I structured it as like going from morning to evening in my recordings, but then of course these recordings are not from the same day, so also there you get this like weird layering of different situations in this place at different times of day, at different times of the year. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we look at in the research project is how these everyday experiences of everyday life in blocks of flats, how people think about well-being, health, and welfare. And I think there's also something about what you said about this, like the fact that place isn't necessarily, fixed, and how by picking up on these shifting weather conditions or different soundscapes at night or in the morning, the drilling. I think those kind of small changes in what might constitute the place is quite, it really does affect people's well-being and sense of well-being, and that's one of the things that's come up in a lot of the conversations I think that I had with participants, but I think that your artwork, Jiska, it really brings all of those things kind of forth in a really nice way that I really appreciate about the work. I do want to have some time as well to maybe open up for if there are any questions from the audience, because we could probably sit here and talk for a while. Yes, please.
I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but maybe it's a question. But I think, is it in the air track where you're writing the building's ventilation makes me think of it as an organ, both in the bodily sense and as an instrument. And I think that's really nice, like in your works, like it isn't a documentation either of a place, but it's also much more poetic, like making this place that might be seemingly mundane somehow, but then looking at it in a completely different way, where it's sort of like, wow, it can be so beautiful to think about it in this way. That it's much more alive and has different meaning. That your work does that. I don't know if that's a question, but yeah, maybe you could say something about that. How would you think about that?
The poetic aspect of the work.
You don't have to.
What to say about that? I think I just try to be really like alert on what it is that I find and what it is that is interesting, and then no, I lost my train of thought again. It's of course I'm coming in as like a visitor, so I will see it different than people that live here, and I also don't want to make a work that pretends like I know this place for like the last 20 years or I live here. So it's a particular entrance to it, and I also I think that I try to take that as a starting point by like highlighting these things that are very personal observations about it, either in sound or in text or in pictures. Yeah.
But for me, that kind of connects a lot with this particular archival approach of, you know, kind of having all of this material and then being able to organize and select, you know, in many different ways, which are all sort of like different poetic readings of it. And I mean, as we talk here, I've been looking at the maps down and looking at this, which is also in one way a kind of map. But I think they're much more like subjective or like possible maps or poetic maps than, you know, which is kind of like, no, pointing to a different reality than the one where there is like one defined authoritarian map, but there are like all of these different ways things can be mapped, and there's never not one of them which is like the definitive one or the right one. It's just different possibilities, different perspectives on it.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yes.
2 questions. Yes.
I think it's a very interesting project. I haven't heard it. I haven't been walking around. So I was also interested in those, how you choose the time for recording, but you answered that. So it means that every track has a kind of from morning to evening.
Just that one is structured like that, the surroundings, but they're all different. So the other ones are not structured like that.
So it's like I find it very interesting that you have this kind of a very open kind of route way of working, and that you let things happen and register things in different, like photo, text. All this is really interesting. I find how that can kind of give a very good. Give another sense to the project, not just strictly sonic dictionary of a place, kind of. But then I was thinking, when you are walking around, there is people living here, and I was thinking that you did some kind of survey or you got these maps from people.
Yeah, so that's from the research, the disobedient research that is. That comes from the University of Oxford. They collected this material, so the packages were sent out to the participants with different questions and like the photo camera and different things. And that material, I got access to some of these, with the participants' consent, I got access to what they had sent in and could use that as like a starting point for my project.
Yeah. But when you were walking around here, I would guess that you met people, and I was just thinking, how it could come. Did some processes start in that encounter with people living here, or how did people living here influence your? Yeah. Did it influence your listening or your approach or your? Yeah,
definitely. I think so, because there's different questions, like everything ranging from what do you worry about to what do you see from your flat, and then I met also one of the participants in their flat and talked with them and recorded there, and another person gave us this like guiding, which was also a participant, guided us around in the blocks and told different stories that were really nice to like get a very different view on these blocks from the inside out in a way, because I would come from the outside in. Talk to the the wachtmeester. Sorry? Caretakers, that work in the buildings, and so there's different perspectives. But in my recordings, I'm often not so interested in like people, or I don't know. I'm more interested in like everything that surrounds them, that then can say something about them, but not like a direct interview, for example. That is a part of that's not a part of the eventual works. But of course, all these conversations that I had with them, and like there's one person I talked to that showed me this kind of like, I don't know if it's like secret room in the building, like that I would never have found if that person didn't like point out to me like this is, so that's very, very nice to get the inside out view on things.
Do you have any idea why you prefer not to have like specific persons being much present in the recordings you eventually make? No.
I think it's because of the interest in like the background sounds also. I think
that's very much the same for me.
Yeah.
Also, but I think for me, there's a number of reasons why. I mean, one is that when I'm out recording, I mean, it's like in particular with this kind of recording, it's like the microphone we're using now is very fine-grained spatial. So if I wanted to, I could really sort of like beam in and stalk on conversations going on. so there's this like ethical dimension to it where I really like, to not be in the middle of a crowd, where I can kind of like really pick up all the conversations, but be at a distance where I kind of like respect privacy in the public space, but also, of course, that the kind of sounds that are there aesthetically, I'm more fascinated by that. And I think I'm also very much interested in sort of like reaching out towards the end of where the ear can go in a way. It's just like the things that are far away, rather than the front is what really kind of like tickle my curiosity, both listening wise, but also kind of like with as a sense of reaching out. But I definitely find a commonality between the two of us.
Yeah. It's not that I don't like people.
No,
but it's just that the sounds they make. No.
But I'm also sure that it's just like if there suddenly was like a section of conversation in one of these tracks, that would change the whole way of listening, because you start listening to the conversation and the meaning of that conversation, and in one way you leave this more material listening to sound itself and to the the sound of the place, and instead it becomes to what is language wise being communicated.
Because there are some like conversations of people like that kind of pass by, or people that are talking to each other but you can't hear what they're saying, but you hear that they're talking. And then the conversations that you do hear passing by are more like almost excerpts of themselves. So it's for example someone that has this like weird how people talk to dogs kind of conversation, or people laughing. So people are present, but like from a distance or like a edited way. Yeah.
I mean, I think it's quite interesting because the project is at the School of Anthropology, which is the study of people. And I'm not an anthropologist myself. My background is architectural history, which also is less people and more, buildings and materials. And but I started my fieldwork then in Oslo last summer. July 2020, so it's been a bit over a year, and I've been the one then that's been sending out these packs and followed up on that with conversations, and then me and my colleagues, we write reports that we share amongst each other from the different field sites and from from this material and the conversations we had with people, we kind of like point out some key themes that we want to explore further. And we did have some conversations. We had a few workshops where we, met, and I talked you through a few of these things. I shared some of the writing I did, but it wasn't a lot. And I think what really surprised me when I started exploring your work is how you actually, so many of like those core key things that the project is about, that was brought to my attention by participants, people who live here. Like it is quite important in your work as well, such as like the drilling, for example. It's not just here that people mention drilling when we ask about their sonic environment and how some sound affect their well-being. It's a feature of I think any everyday life in these modernist high-rise buildings built by concrete. So that's been like a key thing that I have talked to people about, and we talked about in the team, and that you brought into your work. But hopefully you felt that you had artistic freedom and did it in your own way. But I really think that there is also a lot in this work that reflects back on what people living in the blocks have communicated to us, and whether or not those are quite subjective experiences and probably not represents everyone who lives in the block, at least. Yeah, and also that idea of I think the resonance and the echo between buildings is quite interesting. So to me, at least, I feel like it's also a project about the people who live here without maybe hearing, as you say, like their voice or their words. Yeah.
Some of them are in it, but not with actual conversations or like interviews. So, yeah.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I just have a question. Maybe you said it in the beginning, but I'm just thinking about the title.
Yeah.
Disobedient Buildings. Where does it come from?
Well, as I have understood it in the research, it's how are these buildings that were built for so many years ago holding up now?
Yeah.
For the people that live in it, live with the building, and how do they like, for example, cope with the disobedient parts of it, like if things break or other parts of it. Mm-hmm. So I kind of thought along those lines and borrowed the same title. Mm-hmm. And I think for me also the buildings like architecturally are quite disobedient in their surroundings. They're like on top of this hill, super high-rise buildings that in a way don't fit really with the rest of the cityscape. But they create this specific environment, both sonically and like for people living, that I try to reflect on in the work.
I was also wondering, because I mean your own project is called Torn Tracks, and torn is it's like torn between, or kind of torn between something. There's these forces pulling in different directions, which I think is also then a disobedient. Something someone wants to go to that. So I was just wondering, if that kind of coming to the disobedient buildings with the torn tracks, if there were something kind of like productive, kind of like merging between those two titles.
Yeah. And like the tearing of the different recordings and how they are then put together and pulled apart.
Yeah.
And you also had the question.
Yeah, it was partly answered.
Yeah.
But I was wondering like how you reached out, but then I understood that it was through the research project that reached out with this package.
Yeah.
Like how can you say something about that?
How I found people? I think we worked very differently in the different sites because we wanted to compare blocks of flats in the capital of these 3 countries that was taller than 10 stories, and that was in urban areas rather than suburbia, and that kind of narrows it down in Oslo a lot compared to Bucharest in Romania and London, where you have a lot more high-rise buildings. So I quite quickly, and they would also have to be built in the 60s to the latest 1990. So that narrowed it down for me a lot. So I quite quickly, just from walking up on the hill, Ekeberg, just okay, so what do I see that's taller? And then from there, I think we had several different ways of approaching people. Most successfully was through acquaintances. So I would ask everyone I knew, basically, do you know someone who lived in a block? And then they would introduce me, and then from there that snowballing would start. And also at some point I know someone here posted about the project in an internal Facebook group and things like that. So that's kind of how it's been snowballing. So that's one way of, another way to do it, I think, would be to, get a leaflet and give it to everyone in the block, but I think that would be less successful, because I think in order to kind of get people interested and intrigued enough to actually complete these tasks, that consist of disposable cameras and drawing exercises and questions and so on, I think. So that's a bit how I got to know people in the blogs.
You also, after the package was sent, or maybe before, you also followed up with meetings.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't the only contact wasn't through mail, but then when it was possible with Corona, then.
Yeah, and it's follow up with meetings. I also been volunteering in the borough, getting to know people through volunteering, getting a sense of the surroundings outside of the blocks as well, and then some people have participated in a few things. Others, now I kind of meet more regularly, like a friend. So that's kind of how. And that was the idea, that we would spend quite a lot of time on field work over a year. And it was interrupted a bit by COVID lockdowns as well. But I think that's worked quite well. And the idea was never to get do a big survey of 1,000 people, but rather to focus on fewer. Yeah. Yeah, I think we're now approaching, or maybe even overstepped, an hour. Yes, I'm getting some nods. I'd love for everyone to stick around, have a look at the wall, and do feel free to grab I think there's a glass of wine back, and take a booklet with you. If you haven't explored it yet, you can still explore the sound walk. And tell all your friends and neighbors about it. I want to thank Jiska for coming here today, but also for taking this challenge on and being so enthusiastic about the project, and it's been really, really lovely to see. And also to Trond for coming and sharing your experience and thoughts about the project. And I think maybe a final question would be, this is Torn tracks 21 to 24. So what will be the next Torn tracks?
I don't know yet.
Don't know yet.
25.
25.
Yeah, 20 something, 25. Maybe I'll just start on 30 or something. Be crazy.
I think we're all looking forward to the 25th. So thank you so much.
Thank you.